Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Grung. I'm Asped Bedrosian. This Conversations on Grung episode is our first live show on Clubhouse, and hopefully it will be an informative as well as enjoyable discussion for all. Hovik Mancharian and I will be talking about the politics of opening the paths and communications, lifting blockades, and rumors, facts, fallacies around so-called corridors through each other's countries. This live event is being recorded on Tuesday, June 14th, 2021. All right. As part of the November 9th agreement, Armenia and Azerbaijan agreed to a number of points, one of which was the unblocking of all transportation routes in the region and opening unfettered access between Azerbaijan and Nakhijevan. All economic and transport connections in the region shall be unblocked. The Republic of Armenia shall guarantee the security of transport connections between the western regions of the Republic of Azerbaijan and the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic in order to arrange unobstructed movement of persons, vehicles, and cargo in both directions. The Border Guard Security Service of the Russian Federal Security Service shall be responsible for overseeing the transport connections. Note that the agreement does not provide for a physical corridor, but rather unfettered access to be overseen by the FSB. This point in the agreement has led to much contention and consternation. While Azerbaijan and Turkey have pledged full opening of borders, Armenia has refused so far to provide the said transportation link. To talk about these issues, we are joined by Dr. Areg Danagoulian, who is an associate professor of nuclear science and engineering at MIT. He's currently working on new monochromatic methodologies for cargo screening as well as technologies for nuclear arms control treaty verification via resonant phenomena and physical cryptography. And Emil Sanamyan, a senior research fellow at USC's Institute of Armenian Studies, specializing in the politics of the Caucasus. All right, perhaps before discussing this contentious issue, it might be useful to look at the history of the closed borders. I'm not going to read the whole article which we've written about this, but I'm going to pass it on to Areg Danagoulian to start us off basically to talk about the history of the negotiations. Areg?
All right, hello everyone. Thank you for having me here. So I'll talk a little bit about the history in very general terms about just generally what happened starting from the 80s with the transportation links between Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, Russia, etc. I think when the Karabakh movement started in 1988, if people who are from Armenia remember, fairly early on in 1989 and 1990, the connections to Russia from Armenia that were going through Azerbaijan were blocked, and after some time also the rail link was blocked, and similarly the Armenians on their side blocked the connection between Nakhijevan, which is an exclave of Azerbaijan, to Azerbaijan itself. Then when the war started, so the war started in essentially in early 90s, Soviet Union. When I say war started, I mean the militarized conflict. The militarization of an otherwise political conflict started in about 1990, 1991. When Soviet Union collapsed, different countries, neighboring countries, started making diplomatic connections with each other. And in the early days, even though Turkey didn't establish diplomatic relations with Armenia, the border between Armenia and Turkey was open, and there was trade going on, and there were imports of different things back and forth, as well as exports to Turkey. And that continued until, if I believe, 1993, when the Armenian side occupied the Kelbajar or Karvajar, as we later started calling it, a region that is essentially right between Armenia and Karabakh. The region was taken in the spring of 1993 due to its strategic value for increase. It allowed to increase the communication with Karabakh from just a Lachin corridor to a much broader territory, and just in general made defense of Karabakh a lot safer. And Turks retaliated by blocking the border, closing the border with Armenia, and essentially requiring Armenians to withdraw from there in order to open the border. And pretty much from that day on, the war went on for another year. The borders essentially remained closed for a very, very long time. It's very clear that Armenians, for Armenian side, Armenian government and also Armenian public to a great extent, always found this very problematic and always tried to convince or negotiated with the Azeris and the Turkey to open the borders with both countries for quite obvious reasons, right? So there were some, recently there was an interview by Alexander Arzumanyan, who was the foreign minister of Armenia in the 90s, who claimed that in the 90s, the Tansu Çiller's government, Turkey's one of the prime ministers, even offered Armenians that if they could simply withdraw from some limited areas like near Cebrail or something like that, then Turkey would use that essentially as an excuse to open the border with Armenia, because the Turkish side said that they cannot do it because it will look like they have abandoned the Azeris. Later on, when Levon Ter-Petrosyan resigned in 1998, famously in his speech, one of the things that he sort of laid out, the big problems that Armenia was facing, was a closed border with Turkey, which essentially extended Armenian transportation export routes to the west, and thus made Armenian exports more expensive, and as such harmed the Armenian economic productivity and economic output. But further on, when during the Key West agreement, which failed because Heydar Aliyev reneged, this is like early 2000s, Robert Kochanian, he essentially, as part of the agreement, which was fairly broad and very favorable to Armenian side agreement, as part of that, he agreed to open a connection between Azerbaijan and Nakhijevan through Maghrib, something that became cause for much speculations and much I don't know what to say, accusations, mostly like myths about him giving up Maghrib, which was really never the case. There's plenty of evidence to the contrary. Finally, in the 2000s, there was again more diplomacy with the Turks. There was a famous soccer diplomacy where the Armenian and Turkish side came pretty close to opening the border. It never happened, okay? But it's the reason I'm telling this story is because it's very clear that Armenian side always wanted to open not only the border with Turkey, but actually also with Azerbaijan. There were a number of times that Armenians tried to negotiate opening of border with Azerbaijan. The reason being is because open border with Azerbaijan would mean, again, better transportation to Russia, less reliance on Georgia, okay? And as such would ultimately benefit the Armenian economy, and also strategically would be very valuable to Armenia because of reduced reliance on Georgia as the sole path towards the west and towards Russia. Okay, so what is interesting is that since November 9th, things have flipped almost completely. Right now, it looks like the Azeris and the Turks want to open the border, but the Armenian side is completely refusing to do that. Of course, the situation is very different. We had a war that we have lost, so the context has shifted quite a bit. But I guess the reason why we're having this conversation is because this important topic, which has been extremely important in Armenian foreign policy, for Armenian economy, Armenian strategic stability, has essentially been overlooked over the last 6 months, and there has really not been much of a discussion. So.
Emil, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, hi everybody, sure. Hope my voice is coming through clear. In general, it is a bit ironic to discuss the subject matter of sort of interstate connections or unlocking some kind of transportation corridors, considering that as a result of the events of a little over 6 months ago, Armenia actually lost control over its main internal roads, specifically connecting Yerevan to the fourth and the fifth largest towns in Armenia, which are Stepanakert and Kapan, respectively in Artsakh and in Sunik. Currently, those roads are controlled by Russian forces, and Armenia does not have freedom of movement on those main highways that it used to have. There is also pressure to relinquish control over the main highway to Georgia. The road that I mentioned to Stepanakert and to Kapan is also the main highway to Iran. That said, I will have to go back, comment on the history of the Armenia-Turkey border a little bit separately. What Areg laid out is a fairly accurate picture of what happened, except with one issue of what Armenia-Turkey border was like before 1993. There is a sense, sort of retrospective kind of look, sense that things have been kind of an unnatural state in terms of Armenia-Turkey border being closed. As a matter of fact, over the history of Armenia-Turkey border or Turkey-Russia border, prior to Armenia being independent, or Turkey-Soviet Union border, that border was largely closed, mostly closed. I mean, there was some limited trade happening. There were limited rail links, occasionally would be used between the Soviet Union and Turkish Republic. However, that was not regular sort of transportation links, even in the Soviet period.
That border was basically the Iron Curtain, wasn't it?
It was, even the Iron Curtain was much more open. I mean, you could travel between different parts of Berlin, and you could travel between Eastern Europe and Western Europe. This border, it was not just because of the politics of it, but primarily because of the geography of it. It was not a well-traveled border. It's an isolated area, for isolated part of the Soviet Union, isolated part of Turkey, where there's not much economic activity was happening at the time, and historically. So there was not much need to move people or goods in the Soviet period. There were just a few episodes that I'm aware of. People crossing the Soviet-Turkish border by train. Like I remember the story told by Gerard Libaridyan, who traveled that border in the 70s. But this was not a regular type of exchange that was sort of normal would have been, from sort of travel from Yerevan to Kars or Yerevan to, I don't know, some other town in Turkey. That was not happening in the Soviet period. Of course, there was no freedom of travel in the Soviet Union. That was another issue. But there was no open border in the Soviet period. In the period between 1990 and 1993, sort of prior to sort of final closure of the border remained closed except for the brief period in the winter of 1992-1993, while Armenia was suffering the energy crisis, which was a combination of the shutting down of the nuclear power plant, the Azerbaijani diversion groups blowing up the main gas pipeline going through Georgia, having previously closed the gas pipeline going through Azerbaijan. Armenia was completely cut off from both gas and nuclear energy, and there was a blackout over the winter, that especially harsh winter of 1992-1993, and the U.S. government was able to pressure Turkish government to agree to allow some of the there was also the conflict going on in Georgia itself. There was conflict in South Ossetia, and starting in August 1992 in Abkhazia, which closed that railroad that connected Armenia to Russia via Abkhazia. So that precipitated additional problems for Armenia. The U.S. government was able to pressure the Turkish government to briefly open the rail link, to be able to for the U.S. grain and kerosene to be able to go from the Trabzon port through the Turkish territory into Armenia, because Georgia was closed due to fighting. Turkish government agreed to that, but like Areg mentioned, after the capture of Kelbajar, they closed that transit. It was not an open border between Armenia and Turkey. It was Turkey permitting temporary transit for U.S. assistance to come through Turkey into Armenia. That said, there was definitely trade happening, and to this day, and there's always been trade happening between Armenia and Turkey, especially in that period. Turkey became one of the major sources of sort of cheap goods, consumer goods, for the entirety of the Soviet Union. So you had people from all over the Soviet cities, not just Yerevan, Tbilisi, but much further afield in Russia and Ukraine and everywhere else, sort of flocked to Istanbul to purchase, consumer goods, to bring them and sell them in various markets throughout the Soviet Union. And there would be Turkish goods, or there would be goods from other countries, sort of transported via Istanbul. But that was happening via air traffic. Armenians would go from Yerevan to, I don't know, Sochi or to Moscow or to Tbilisi, take a flight to Istanbul, get a bunch of goods, bring it back and sell it in Yerevan. And it was a major source of economic activity for the entirety of the ex-Soviet Union. If we look at number of people that were engaged in that kind of trade, it was called the shuttle trade. They would bring goods in this huge shuttle, they would call them chelnochny, in Russian chelnochny, those big bags of goods they would bring to sell. If you look at how many people were engaged in that trade, I would probably venture to say it was many more Armenians were engaged in that trade than, say, in the fight for Karabakh or in any other sort of nationalist undertaking like that. So that importance of Turkey, economic importance for Turkey, always existed. However, in addition to the political aspect that Areg mentioned, there was always an issue of subpar trade infrastructure that existed there. The reason there is a rail link between Armenia and Turkey is because Russian Empire used to include the entirety of Armenian Republic today, and also Kars. So as the Russian Empire expanded into the Caucasus, they brought the rail link first down to Baku, and then to Tbilisi, and then down to Yerevan, and then also actually first to Kars and then to Yerevan. That infrastructure sort of survived the civil war. Kars, of course, became part of the Republic of Turkey, but the rail link, remained there. And then much later, Turkish government connected Kars to the interior of Turkey. So that's how that rail line came to be. There was never an effort to build a rail line to connect an Armenia and Turkey, right? It's just an accident of history that exists. And it never had that sort of economic underpinning that would just involve Armenia and Turkey. It was always a rail link that either involved Russia, center of Russia, and the periphery of Russia, or the center of Turkey and the periphery of Turkey. So when you have the sort of two peripheries of Eastern Turkey and Armenia come together, there is, of course, a local interest in terms of having some kind of trade. I remember going to Turkey in 2010 and meeting with the former mayor of Kars, who was a proponent of opening the border with Armenia. But the main cause for that kind of activism on his part had to do with the fact that he was representing the Kurdish-friendly, pro-Kurdish party, current that period iteration, sort of the precursor to HDP, the current pro-Kurdish party, and his main local opponents were sort of the local Azerbaijanis, who were very much opposed to that and sort of supporting the nationalists in Turkey. And there was as much a political discourse within Turkey as it was an economic discourse. So yes, going back to this whole notion, yes, of course, Armenia always wanted to have open border with all of the countries around it. It's a small country that doesn't have many resources and doesn't have that many options for trade, and the more would be beneficial for Armenia. However, the notion that there was normal trade at any point historically is a flawed one. There was never an open border environment around Armenia, and when there was, Armenia was not a separate entity. It was part of another larger entity.
So, Emil, Ilham Aliyev has been calling the open communications agreement point corridors. I think this is probably for domestic consumption to look very victorious and capable and everything. But of course, this has caused Armenians a lot of consternation, right? Is there an issue of sovereignty? What does communication mean? What does corridor mean? So as a question, does East-West communication for this communication between Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan going through Sunik prevent North-South communication? Does it block Armenia from Iran? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, not necessarily, of course. I mean, you can imagine all kinds of scenarios where there is open traffic. The question is about sovereignty. At this point, having relinquished control over Artsakh, which was the most important sign and important element and important instrument of sovereignty that Armenia had. Think about it. For 30 years, in defiance of Russian position, defiance of U.S. position, defiance of UN position, Armenia maintained control over Artsakh and continued to develop as a country. So that's that's where the sovereignty comes from. It doesn't come from the fact that you have a seat at the United Nations. Sovereignty comes from independent action. It's like electricity, right? I mean, you have to do something to be able to develop that kind of sovereignty. So, having relinquished that sovereignty, the question today is whether Armenia has sovereignty over its own territory. And like I already mentioned, it does not have sovereignty over the main highway connecting it's our Republic of Armenia and Iran. That's the fact today, independent of whether there is a corridor, additional territory ceded, additional. The current situation means that Armenia has already relinquished control over Armenia-Iran highway. Russia plays a role, and actually, Armenia's position is that that territory is Azerbaijani territory. It's not its territory. Around Kapan, in that area. So. Going back to the corridor issue, as Areg mentioned, back in during the negotiations between Heydar Aliyev and Robert Kocheryan, Heydar Aliyev was ready to agree to Karabakh within its Soviet autonomy borders, plus the Lachin corridor, becoming part of Armenia. But he wanted something additional, in addition to the 6 districts that we would be getting.
That's right.
Part of that deal. He wanted a piece of Armenia attached to Azerbaijan, and he wanted Mehri to be part of Azerbaijan, that corridor. Of course, Kocheryan could not agree to that because that would, create created a problem for him domestically. So this notion of sovereign corridor was discussed, where, it could be they were actually thinking of. Having a bridge built or a tunnel built that would go through Mehri or around Mehri, or some way that would not be visible or would not be a sort of crisscrossing with the local roads. And
let me ask the question to Areg. Given the conversations that are happening today, Areg, does the Azerbaijan-Nakhijevan connection pose a threat to Armenia today?
So I just want to go back a little bit in time and sort of again touch upon what was agreed. What were the different conversations in the 90s and in Key West between Armenians and Heydar Aliyev. So first of all, this whole conversation is about giving up Mehri. It's not entirely out of thin air. There was a global plan that was proposed in the 90s, and there was even conversation between Süleyman Demirel and his American counterparts about possibly doing territorial swaps, Mehri to Azerbaijan and Lachin.
You're referring to the Paul Goebel plan.
That's right, yeah. And it looks like so what happened at Key West? The Key West, most of my sources, I have to say, is based on the reading of A Black Garden by Tom Deval, where he says that essentially, the Armenians agreed to basically unobstructed access between Azerbaijan and Nakhijevan. And there was all kinds of discussions about how that would happen. Theoretically, it could have been just a road, or Azeris would be allowed to use a road. There would be guarantees that they would not be harmed along the way. There was a proposal to build an overpass all the way from Azerbaijan to Nakhijevan, etc., in order to minimize any kind of interaction between local Armenians and Azeri traffic, whatnot. But basically, the main argument was that it would be 8 meters of Armenian territory, 24 by 24 kilometers. If you do the math, that's about 20 hectares. I have friends in New Mexico whose backyards are larger than that. It's kind of a moot point because it never came to pass. Key West was abandoned, essentially. But many of the opponents of Robert Kocheryan sort of capitalized on that and sort of, in some cases, intentionally misinterpreted it like he's giving up Mehri, right? And this debate, this narrative sort of became like a sticking point and became sort of like a stick with which people bashed on Kocheryan, including some members of the Levon Ter-Petrosyan administration. I've heard some senior members of the administration sort of say that, Kocheryan agreed to give up Mehri, when it's like factually not true, okay? He didn't give up Mehri, or didn't agree to giving up Mehri. It would have been a disaster for everyone. Not only for Armenia would be disaster, but Iran would not allow something like that.
Now,
right?
you can correct me if I'm wrong, Areg or Emil. I think what I remember was that in the Key West agreements, the discussion went where Kocheryan said, basically, he wants to keep Artsakh. What do you want for it? And then the response was he wanted Mehri. Aliyev wanted Mehri.
Yeah, but the question is that what was written down in Key West essentially was just unfettered access to Nakhijevan, which eventually in Key West, Aliyev essentially agreed to, and then later the whole agreement was thrown out of the window when he came back to Baku. Now, okay, that's history. The question, and that's the background of what that turned into. Question is, okay, what if such a connection is allowed between Azerbaijan and Nakhijevan? What does it mean for Azerbaijan? And what does it mean for Armenia? Let's talk specifically not about the sovereign corridor, but let's talk about specifically what is written in Article number 9, which again talks about unobstructed transportation link, right? Let's try to address specific points at a time. Then we can talk about what Azeris really want to do. Maybe they want to get corridor.
Let's do that.
Yeah. So in that context, okay, let's see what do Azeris gain by having an unfettered access to Nakhijevan. So there may be this temptation to think of like that Nakhijevan is essentially blockaded, etc. Well, it's definitely currently blockaded by Armenia, but Nakhijevan is not blockaded from the rest of the world, right? So right now, if you go on Google Maps, you can see that from Julfa in Nakhijevan to get to Horadiz, Azerbaijan, it's a 6-hour drive through Iranian territory. Like there's a real active access. If you are in Nakhijevan, and we are talking about this from point of view of Nakhijevan itself, right? Nakhijevan, the primary thing that is important for any business or any kind of anyone who's doing anything in Nakhijevan is connection to large markets, okay, where they can sell their products. That primarily means Tabriz, which is a 3-hour drive from Nakhijevan, to Van in Turkey, which is a 4-hour drive, and then another 5-hour drive to Kars, right? And then from Kars, there's a fast rail connecting to Ganja, or what we call Ganzak, and to Baku, right? So Nakhijevan is very well connected in general to most economic hubs in the region, right? And to me, it's not entirely clear, purely economically, what this connection would provide to Nakhijevan itself, right? What I suspect, and I realize that I'm speculating here, right, that I suspect that some of this connection is probably if it benefits economically. I'm talking about economics. Mostly what it will benefit is not so much Nakhijevan, the connection to bombed out Zangelan and Jebral, but actually it will help Zangelan and these new territories that Azeris have taken back. Azeris are trying to repopulate those territories, and to repopulate, they have to create incentives for people to move there. It's a very hostile environment because it's littered with landmines and it's right next to, essentially still a war zone, right? So at the very least, if someone is moving to Zangelan, they need to be able to, for transportation to nearby points of economic activity, which Nakhijevan is. I suspect, and again, this is a speculation, that this is actually going to benefit Zangelan and Jebrail and Fizuli and Kubatli more than it will benefit Nakhijevan. So this is purely economics. Now, if we think about more in terms of like military strategic point of view, look, it's obviously an additional road cannot hurt, right? It's always an additional road, even if it's just unfettered access and not a sovereign kind of connection, is always going to be beneficial. But from a military point of view, in terms of transporting, let's say, military hardware to Nakhijevan from Azerbaijan, I mean, it's going to be, at least the way it's written in Article number 9 from November 9th agreement, is going to be under surveillance of FSB, right? And Armenians, right? Armenians also going to see everything that goes through there. So secrecy, okay, is going to be essentially impossible as far as weapons transfers are concerned. Armenians and Russians will be able to essentially keep count of tonnage, of type of trucks, their license plates, everything that Azeris take to Nakhijevan.
Areg, I'm actually going to ask you and Emil about that, but go ahead and finish the point.
Yeah. So obviously there's still, the military transports, even under surveillance, is better than no military transports at all. Okay. I suspect that, quite honestly, transportation through Iranian territory is probably more secure for the Azeris because it's more reliable. Okay. That said, some kind of independence from Iran in terms of transit is probably going to be beneficial to Azerbaijan at the time of crisis. In case if there's another war between Armenia and Azerbaijan, it's obvious that road is going to be shut down within 30 seconds of the first shot fired, right? Mm-hmm. So in times of a military crisis, any kind of transportation is going to come to a stop. So I in my view, okay, this transportation link has some residual value for Azerbaijan in terms of circumventing and bypassing Iran. But I think its value to Azerbaijan I think it's quite limited. So as such, I don't think it's as big of a threat as it may seem. people tend to like draw maps connecting lines with each other, and it looks very scary. Armenia sort of essentially from the south being cut off from Iran. But also it does not intercept any Armenian transportation between, say, Armenia to Iran, notwithstanding the kind of things that Emil essentially listed, that the fact that now Armenian communications have to go through essentially Azeri territory.
But Emil, can you talk a little bit about what unfettered or what was the word that they were using in the document?
Unobstructed.
Unobstructed really mean? Does that mean that Azeris can move drugs or weaponry or armaments, illegal nuclear waste and stuff like that, and the Armenians have absolutely no way of checking this?
They're gonna move the Syrian terrorists back and forth just to annoy Armenians.
Well,
listen. This is how I view this. We have to look at the history of the Karabakh conflict. This is still Karabakh conflict. Let's not forget that. And
absolutely,
the position, evolving position of Azerbaijani government reflected reality on the ground. So at the time when, first the Soviet army and Azerbaijani Interior Ministry basically controlled Karabakh or most of Karabakh, the position was that we're not giving you any status, and our status for Armenians in Azerbaijan, which they consider Karabakh to be, will mirror whatever status Azerbaijanis in Armenia will have. Even though if there's no Azerbaijanis left in Armenia, then that means there will be no Armenians left in Azerbaijan. Okay, so this has been the position of Azerbaijani government in the late Soviet period. Since the basically Sumgait, the exchange of population, the last Azerbaijani village in Armenia was actually, as a matter of fact, Nuvade, which was on the road between Mehri and Zangilan. So if you think about it, up until August 1992, Azerbaijanis, or really Soviet army and Soviet border guard, together with Azerbaijani police, controlled about half of Mehri corridor. If you think of that Mehri border with Iran, about half of it was controlled by Azerbaijan up until August 1991. And then after an Armenian attack, that village was evacuated in August 1991, just as Azerbaijanis were pushing Armenians out of Sanamyan and other areas in the north of Karabakh. So as long as Azerbaijan had this position of dominance, and it continued into 1992, and in 1993, their position was that any allowance for Armenian presence in Karabakh will be connected to an allowance for Azerbaijani presence in Armenia. That was what they laid out when, say, for example, Ter-Petrosyan sent agreed to have Ashotbalian go to Baku and sort of beg for peace in the fall of 1992. It's really
Balayan is a Yazidi, right?
He's Armenian, as far as I know. I don't know what his ancestry are. He's, well regarded as a school director of Hitar Seba Stasi School in Yerevan.
Okay.
He's an Armenian intellectual who, sort of originally, you could say, the first kind of intellectual, what would be the word? Not, I don't want to call him father, but definitely an influencer on Nikol Pashinyan's ideas.
Yes.
As a person, as a student, and
a mentor.
Fact, yeah, you could call him a mentor. He was Nikol Pashinyan was campaign director for Ashotbalian's presidential campaign in 1998. That was first foray by Nikol Pashinyan into Armenian politics beyond his writing articles as a student journalism. So Ashotbalian came and they told him, okay, well, we're gonna agree to for this if you agree to the fact that there is going to be an Azerbaijani presence in Armenia. So that was the position. Of course, after the defeat of Azerbaijan between 1993 and 1994, that position has been pushed to the background because the priority has become regaining the districts around Karabakh, and now that that's been accomplished, the priority is to regain the rest of Karabakh. And if that is encumbered somehow, and it is encumbered by November 10 agreement that allows for Russian peacekeeping forces, Azerbaijan is demanding sort of, if not complete mirror, which is impossible, of course, there's not an Azerbaijani minority left in Armenia, but some form of Azerbaijani sovereignty on the Republic of Armenia territory. Okay, so this is discussion of this corridor or whatever. That's how I perceive it, and I think that's how they perceive it, is that having allowed for Russian peacekeeping presence and sort of Armenians, being able to wake up in the morning, walk around Stepanakert and go back home, they want something in return for that in terms of rights in the Republic of Armenia. And if that's connected in their mind, and if Armenia is refusing, then they will, make sure that there is no Armenian presence left in Karabakh, basically. So that's how I look at it. And going back to this whole discussion of the political aspect of this that Areg touched on, position by Leon Terptrasyan was that we wouldn't be able to get Azerbaijan to agree to Karabakh's independence or reunification with Armenia. So we have to agree to an autonomous status by Karabakh within Azerbaijan. That was the position originally in 1990, pretty much since the time he became leader of Armenia. And that position remained his position, even though Armenia won the war in 1993 and 1994. And when time sort of came and Kocharyan came to an agreement where Heydar Aliyev was ready to agree to Karabakh becoming part of Armenia, that just did not rhyme with the thesis that Terptrasyan proposed, and of course the concession that would have been on a sovereign corridor was sort of magnified in the domestic Armenian political discourse as surrender of Mehri rather than an
So would you say
opportunity to
we
resolve this
stopped
conflict.
ourselves on that point?
What's that?
Would you say that we stopped ourselves on that point?
I mean, no. There's the Armenian domestic political
Right.
discourse, which substantially is divorced from what's happening on the ground. The reality is Heydar Aliyev, in the end, decided not to agree to the compromise because, as we know from what he said later and what Robert Kocharyan said in his book, is that because his son Ilham Aliyev was against it, and he was ready to hand power over to him, and Ilham Aliyev didn't want. He saw that potential surrender, as weakening their political position in Azerbaijan. So that was the key issue. It was up to them to agree to this deal, and they refused to agree to it.
Emil,
By deal, I mean making the autonomous Karabakh within autonomous borders and the Lachin corridor part of Armenia in exchange for the sovereign corridor and the 6 districts around Karabakh.
I want to quickly get your impression on what is Russia's position on all this, on opening communications, and what do they stand to gain?
Russia's position. I mean, if we look at 99% of Russian political establishment beyond Vladimir Putin, there's hardly any interest in any of this. Okay, this is like a periphery of Russian political discourse. There's very little interest, very little,
well, I mean, they brokered the agreement, so.
Well, the reason they brokered the agreement is because Vladimir Putin got involved, and he thinks that there is some kind of responsibility he has towards sort of saving Armenians or being the moderator in that part of the world. And of course, having been isolated from much of the world in the past number of years, this is one place where, as in the words of the former French foreign minister, he mentioned that Putin can play a good guy. Yeah,
Kushner.
Bernard Kushner. Yeah, Bernard Kushner. Yeah, that's a very important role for Putin. That's always been a very important role for all of leaders of Russia and the Russian sort of imperialist thinking, that they are a civilizer of uncivilized areas of the world, such as the Caucasus and Central Asia. So that is the goal of Russia. I mean, if you look at historically, when Russia started to expand in the Caucasus, I mean, the place was not much to be proud of. I mean, it was
Yeah,
pretty much in a stone age still. I mean, the cities were built and the economy was established, and the cognac, Armenian cognac, was created thanks to Russian
certainly Russian consumption.
entrepreneur, not so much even Russian consumption, but actual Russian business thinking. They
Uh-huh.
went and studied the French cognac making, looked at where they could plant the grapes, and they thought the Armenia worked well, so they brought it into Armenia. It could have been Azerbaijan, or it could have been Georgia. Uh, what Armenians have, I think, have suffered from is sort of very cursory understanding of Armenian history in terms of the last number of centuries, let's say last 3 centuries, last 4 centuries.
All right.
There is a lot of thinking about, I don't know, the first century AD, because there's this map of Armenia, right, that Armenians know, or I don't know, the first Christian state. But the continuation of that and understanding of the fact that Armenians were a stateless nation for close to a millennium is not really very well settled and not critically appreciated.
Hmm.
The fact that there is an Armenian state today is a product of Russian foreign policy, Russian imperialist policy, and Leninist national policy, where ethnic minorities or ethnic groups were allowed to have either national republics, or even if they never had any statehood before, or autonomous republics. So that's having come to this present day through this number of Russian, I don't know, Soviet initiatives. The notion was that this is the norm. Armenia, it's a norm for Armenia to be an independent state, but
Yeah.
that's very far divorced from natural process of how Armenia became an independent state. It was constructed. It was constructed with a lot of investment from outside of Armenia. Going back to again Russian position today is that on the one hand there is this sort of cynical sense that the Russians always talk about how Armenians don't appreciate the fact that the Russians created Armenian state as we know it today. And they wanted to show Armenians, what are they really capable of without Russian support, and
Okay.
this has precipitated this current crisis. And however you look at it, this is the reality. Armenians never were able to stand up for themselves when it came to a fight with a large country like Turkey, and of course Turkey was directly involved in this war.
Right.
Russian position today, they would like to keep Turkey out of this region. They don't know how, because Turkey is very much, enmeshed with Azerbaijan and many links, and this has been sort of a production of many decades and more than a century of work by Azerbaijani intellectuals, sort of modeling their nationhood, which is of course a new phenomenon
Well, if they
on
want to know
Turkey.
how, they can ask me. They can certainly keep a very strong Armenia, and that'll help. Let me ask a question to Areg here. Areg, are there financial estimates of the benefits to all the sides to opening all these communication links?
So let me just reflect on what Emil was saying, because I think that's very important, the history of the Armenian state. I mean, definitely the foundation of the Armenian state as we know today is strongly related to the Soviet past in terms of the Armenian Soviet Socialist republics. But I think let's not, I mean, and Russia has played a huge role in Armenian history. There's no question about that. But Armenian nationalism and the belief in an Armenian nation state was the first concept came about with the rise of Armenian nationalism happened in the end of 19th century. The two parties that sort of pushed for it were the Dashnaks and the Hunchaks, who were very active primarily in Ottoman Empire. While Dashnak party was founded in Tbilisi, Georgia, most of its activities happened in Ottoman Empire, and in part this is what led to the confrontation between Armenian essentially minority in Ottoman Empire and the Ottoman state itself, which ultimately resulted in Armenian genocide. Let's not forget that the first Armenian state, the First Republic, was created as a result of Russian abandonment. Okay, after 1917, when the Russians withdrew essentially in chaos after the revolution, the Armenian state was founded as a consequence and essentially as an inevitability. There were lots of resistance at the time to create a new republic, but the republic was created as a way of trying to defend against the Turkish incursion, and in combination with Dashnak belief that Armenians need to have their own national state. Mm-hmm. So I would not. I mean, while again, I agree with Emil that Russians have played a big role in Armenian statehood. Let's not dismiss it entirely as Armenian state being like a project of the Russians. I mean, Dashnaks were revolutionaries. They were against Tsar. They were in confrontation with the Russian Empire in many ways, and Russia punished Armenians heavily in the early 90s by, for example, banning teaching of Armenian language schools, and confiscating the Armenian church's property. So, there is a degree to which some of these things are true, but to a great degree, Armenians themselves have come up with their own ideas of Armenian statehood. Now, specific to the question of what is the economic value, I do not have any numbers. It's a good question. People have been talking about this for 25, almost 30 years, and yet I don't see any thorough economic analysis performed. That doesn't mean that it has not been done, because I'm not an economist. I know of the only economic analysis that I know of is the one that Levon Terpetosyan presented in his address in 1998, where he claimed that Armenian economy would never develop under current conditions because Armenian exports are so expensive, because Turkish border is closed. But there's definitely kind of understanding that yes, you do need open borders if you want economic, like a long-term, stable, reliable economic growth. And by the way, earlier Emil was talking about the Kars mayor and the fact that the Turkish population in eastern Turkey, or what we call Western Armenia, in Anatolia, has been quite interested in opening the border, but it's not entirely a matter of Kurdish-Armenian relations, which are vastly different from Turkish-Armenian relations, granted. It has to do with the fact that that region would benefit significantly if the border were to be opened, because they would be able to export to Armenia, and there would be trade to Armenia, and that ultimately would benefit that region. That was the main motivator why the Kurds in Anatolia were quite interested in opening borders. Just even consider Armenian tourism, right? Kars draws significant amount of it's lots of his budget comes from Armenian tourists coming and like going and visiting Ani, visiting Mount Ararat. Imagine that instead of having to go to Georgia, they could cross the border directly into Kars and and engage in business over there. But that said, I realize this is very qualitative. This is very general. I don't know if anyone has done. I know of economists who wanted to do this analysis, but I think that's a good question. Yeah.
I believe the ARF Dashnak did a study, because even in 2008, when they were doing the soccer diplomacy, the Armenian government had not, or at least they accused the Armenian government of not doing it properly. And they found a lot of problems where there needed to be some kind of preparation for the Armenian economy in order to do this. And I don't know the specifics, but there was a study. We should pull it up and have... share it with others. But other than that, I don't think that there has been anything else.
Look, this actually, the whole headline of this talk today reminded me of many talks that happened inside the Beltway in the early 2000s, at the time when Armenians were being convinced it was a good thing to withdraw forces from around Karabakh in exchange for some kind of economic benefit. And there were a couple of papers prepared at the time by the World Bank. I remember, I think one was definitely by the World Bank that we were circulating around at the time, how the costs of economic transportation would be reduced from Armenia. That was sort of based on kind of iffy math, I think, because most people have never traveled that route between Armenia and Turkey. One person who has, Tatola Kopyan, in more recent years, during the Armenian-Turkish diplomacy under Serge Sargsyan and Abdullah Gül, people realize how difficult it is to travel through that historic Armenia, how mountainous it is, and it would still be much, make much more geographic and economic sense for Armenia to continue to trade with Turkey via Georgia than through direct routes, just because of that geography. If you look at the physical map of Armenian homeland rather than Tigran Met's map, you realize that that area has never been really contiguous. It's just geographically set up that way.
Yeah.
And there's been other studies done, and there's a bit of there's been increased realization that there is really not major economic benefit. There is political benefit. You want to have normal relations with Turkey, and you want to substantiate that with something. So Armenia was trying to use the leverage that it had, that rail connection between Gyumri and Kars, to sort of let Turkey use it to go to Azerbaijan, to go to Russia. Something that Armenia could give to Turkey that's useful to Turkey, so that Turkey would be less hostile to Armenia. Same with Azerbaijan. Armenia under Kocharyan was ready to open without preconditions. Was ready to open direct ground communications between Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan through whatever route that went through Armenia, not just Mehri, any route. But Azerbaijan, of course, refused to have any direct connection. So again, coming back, this is a political issue. It's not an economic issue. Politically, we need to figure out how Armenia can, whether Armenia can, survive there as an independent state, and how it's going to be done. Say without Russian direct participation. So far,
Emil,
yeah.
This is actually related to the last question I want to ask to both of you guys. What are the political causes that you see that may or may not be damaged by opening these communication lines? And also the fact that recently there's been a lot of pressure mounting on Armenians to start border demarcation delineation process, which we've said on our podcast seem to be premature because it might affect the Artsakh independence and self-determination. So those are actually two topics that I'm interested in. The two causes that may or may not be hurt by this process are Artsakh's independence cause and then the genocide recognition if all these communication lines are opened.
Sorry, but after everything that happened, I don't know what else can hurt Artsakh's cause of independence. I mean, Armenians have clearly demonstrated that this is not a priority issue for them to have control over Artsakh.
Well, certainly the current government has indicated that, but
not just the current government, I'm sorry, but the vast majority of Armenians and the vast majority of Armenian citizens living in Armenia. They've demonstrated that their priorities are somewhere else. It's not about maintaining control over their country. So that's.
Do they feel the same way?
That's how it's demonstrated. The war is an ultimate test of whether people want to have control over a certain territory or not. I mean, obviously, it was shown that they don't. So, I mean, I'm not saying that it's easy to do. It's not easy. It's just that's where the test is. It's not about opening some kind of communications or whatnot. None of that plays any significant role.
Areg?
So just we're discussing lots of things simultaneously. I just want to make one additional comment about the question of what are the benefits of opening the borders with Turkey. I mean, I guess Emil is right in that the transportation infrastructure in eastern Turkey is fairly, limited. There has historically not been that much communication. That's true. But if you look at the Armenian-Iranian border in 1991, also it was completely stagnant. There were very narrow abandoned roads. There was no normal bridge that would be able to support real transportation through Arax River. And yet, because of economic interest, when new bridge was built, new roads were built or widened, and transportation infrastructure was set up. So transportation infrastructure followed the economic kind of incentives, right? So I think it's wrong to look at this in a very static way, there's tiny little villages on the other side, dirt roads on the other side, and same thing here. No, but that will change if there is, economic incentive. And clearly there has been economic incentives on both sides. Armenians, as Emil very clearly described, have been actively going to Turkey through the long way to Georgia. Okay, the Kurds in Anatolia clearly have been shown interest in opening the border for economic reasons. So there is that aspect to it. Now, as far as the question of how does this all affect politics, I think that's a very good question. Look, I'll say the following, right? I mean, one of the reasons why this problem has been dragging on for such a long time, a big part of it was the deep distrust. Maybe distrust is an understatement. It's more like deep hatred between two sides towards each other, right? And we sort of find out historically that when there is trade, people are less interested in killing each other. Why? Because why would you want to kill your customers? Right? You, if anything, you become interested in your customers' prosperity so they can buy more stuff. And if you're a customer, you're interested in whoever it is you're trading or buying stuff from in their prosperity so they can provide you with cheap products. So the more economic trade there is, the likelihood of war in general goes down. We see this throughout the whole planet, okay? Not just in the Caucasus, okay? We see this everywhere. And in general, while open borders can, in the short term and in some specific cases, can hurt let's say the economies, the local economies, overall, vast majority of the cases, right, globalization of economy has ultimately benefited to the planet, right, more or less. So I think in order for this problem in the long term, and when I say long term, I don't mean next 3-5 years, I don't mean Nikol and Aliyev type of era. I'm talking about like next 30, 40, 50 years. In order for there to be like some kind of long-term peace, people need to start talking to each other. And best way for them to talk to each other is to trade with each other, okay, in an active way. And in the process, learning how not to hate each other and how to tolerate each other's presence across a border or next to each other. So I think overall, when we're looking at more like grand long-term goals, I think communication, and really the word is communication means both verbal communication and transportation communication. Both are critical for the future of this region. I mean, look, one thing that is very clear, right? We're thinking about Armenia's relations with Russia, Armenia's relations with America, Europe. Look, America's, Europe's, Russia's are going to come and go, but Turkey and Azerbaijan are going to stay. And if we want to survive in this region for a long way, it cannot be through a military confrontation. Because in case of a long-term military confrontation, okay, Armenia, a country of 3 million against 90 million Turkey and 10 million Azerbaijan, has no chance of winning. I'm sorry, Armenia is not going to become Israel in the short or medium term, okay? And we might not survive the long term, for that matter. Okay, so we need to think of a long-term relations with Turkey and Azerbaijan under the assumption that Russians sooner or later will abandon us. Okay, if we look at the last 120 years, there have been at least 2 cases where Armenia was fully abandoned by Russia. The first one was after the revolution in 1917, and the second one was after the revolution in 1991. Okay, after the first revolution, it was a disaster for the Armenians. The second revolution, it happened to be that Azeris were in a total chaos, so we ended up winning the war. We sort of lucked out in that Azeris did so badly, so poorly prepared, and were so incompetent that we managed to defeat them. But next time when Russians abandon us, and it's just a matter of time, the way I look at this, okay, Azeris, we will not have the benefits of chance on our side, or at least we should not be counting on that, okay? So we should sort of start thinking about that in these terms, that I think communicating with your neighbors is absolutely critical for long-term stability and security.
We are at 1 hour right now, and I want to open the floor to raised hands and see if we have any questions. Hovik, you have a question, I understand.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask the first question, and I'll let the crowd also, then participate. So I think that Areg, I appreciate your argument, but comparing Armenia's size, your argument, that same argument works under any scenario, because there is no way in hell that we will be able to be a big enough trade partner with Turkey to ever sort of even make them think twice about prioritizing trade over geopolitical interests. Look at Syria, look at Iraq, look at all around Turkey. Turkey, with its Mavi Vatan or blue sort of homeland strategy, is in an expansionist mode. So yes, we understand that, but to say that doing trade with them will somehow dissuade them from doing other harm to us, when Erdogan today is clearly stating that they're going to continue the policy of what their ancestors did in their early 1900s. I think we need to take that threat seriously, and 90% of what happens if we, let's say, decide to open borders would be with Turkey. But also I want to mention this. Varujan Geghamian, a famous Turkologist in Armenia, has concerns about this agreement, in that it can be a ticking time bomb, because if we sign off on this, and if we say that there is a we're going to give unfettered access. We didn't talk too much about it because I think we'll be speculating, but could it be that, okay, there's some kind of event and someone closes the road, or someone shoots at a car on the road, and who has the ability, like, does that mean that war is starting again, or does that mean that Azerbaijan and Turkey can attack and take over? I didn't talk we didn't see discussion about this, but I think we need to figure out how to, if we are going to open borders, then we need to be careful not to allow any of that, or minimize the possibility of that.
Yeah.
And lastly, I know we're talking about opening communications without talking about all the other things that are happening, and that's for a purpose, like such as the return of our POWs, and all the other conditions. But I just want to let the audience know as well that yes, we're talking about only this issue in isolation, but it's worthwhile to know, okay, well, yes, we did open the borders, but are there other influences that could affect that?
So I think, look, it doesn't really help us to build this kind of simplistic views of Turkey, right? So one thing about Erdogan that people are kind of talking about pan-Turkism. So first of all, we need to remember Erdogan is not a pan-Turkist, he's a pan-Islamist, first and foremost, right? But more importantly, Erdogan is not even pan-Islamist, he's a very pragmatic, right? Yes, he's building relations with Turkic nations, but he's also building relations with Ukraine, which is not Turkic, with Russia, actually, which is not Turkic. Russia is building nuclear power plants in Mersin province. It's building, it's involved in Libya, which is not a Turkic state. It has, supporting Palestinians who are not Turkic. Turkey, today they had a meeting with Joe Biden, who is not a Turk. So Erdogan, first and foremost, is a pragmatic politician, okay, who has this view that he needs to increase the influence of Turkey throughout the region. But even then, Erdogan is last 20 years, and Erdogans will come and go. Before Erdogan, okay, the Republican movement, okay, the Republican Turkey, was much more isolationist, okay. Atatürk had this zero problem with neighbors type of a policy, and for about 70 years, other than the conflict in North Cyprus, Turkey was fairly isolated country. And in the 90s, okay, Turkey essentially avoided getting involved in any military action in Karabakh war. So what we need to think about is, like, it's not when you open borders, you don't invite their troops to come into the center of Yerevan, right? Opening economic relations does not mean disarming yourself and exposing yourself to a wanton Turkish attack. No, what you can do is that you can have an economic development. At the same time, you can develop your forces. The goal is to increase the value of peace through trade, and to increase the cost of war with a better military, right? So you need to do those things simultaneously. If everyone likes to talk about Israel does this remarkably well. Israel, on one hand, has a strong military in case peace fails. At the same time, has been actively developing peace with all its hostile neighbors, right? It signed the Camp David in the 70s with Egypt to essentially, Israel gave Egypt a territory the size of half of Caucasus, the Sinai Peninsula, just so that it has peace with Egypt, even though there was no guarantee that next year Egypt will flip. So Israel has really played. Now they are doing this new diplomacy with Saudi Arabia, with United Arab Emirates, etc. So you need to simultaneously both work towards peace by economic exchanges being probably a part of that, a component of that. At the same time, yes, having a strong military and developing your military. The two things don't contradict each other,
I just want to mention to everyone listening that the floor is open for raising hands. If you have a question, don't hesitate to raise your hands, please. Wait a second, there are some hands.
So I just want to remind that this call is recorded. When I give you time to speak, please try to keep it short and announce your name and talk, and please keep it respectful. So I'm going to invite Johnny, I believe was first. Johnny, can you talk? You're on mute.
Hey guys, how are you?
Hello. We can hear you.
Just a question for Areg. How did the open borders with Batumi in Georgia turn out for the Georgians?
So to answer that, I don't live in Batumi. I'm not there to know that. I do have Georgian friends, and so far I have not seen the Georgian economy collapse or being invaded by Turkey. Okay, so I think look, one thing that is important is opening borders does not mean having incompetent economic policy, right? Like one of the things that people talk a lot about is the risk of, for example, uncontrolled let's say, influx of products, okay, which will destroy the local economy and things like that, right? So first of all, there are ways to control that, okay? There are duties that can be imposed. There is anti-dumping measures that can be implemented if the country is trying to achieve, perform dumping about parts of the country. We should know that of all, because only 2 days ago, United States introduced anti-dumping penalties against the aluminum factory in Yerevan for undercutting American competitors. So these kind of practices exist. Okay, there's many tools in the economic policy that can be used to control control trade. Again, it's not all for all. So far, I mean, people can disagree with me. So far, I have not seen any kind of an economic or political crisis in Georgia, brewing up because of close relations with Turkey.
Emil, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, no doubt, open borders are better than closed borders. There's always the economic policy to be able to impose tariffs when necessary. Like I said, the issue with Turkey is a political issue. How to find a way, find a modus operandi to coexist with Turkey. So we have, for example, the Armenian community in Istanbul that found that modus operandi through a combination of international guarantees under the Lausanne Treaty and also locally. I mean, they basically swear loyalty to the Turkish state, first to Atatürk, now they're swearing loyalty to Erdogan. That's how they exist, right? They still have their community infrastructure, churches, hospitals, they do weddings, athletic events, etc. When Armenian Olympics were happening in Yerevan, they had one of the biggest athletic representations. So the community still exists. Of course, it's diminishing year after year. It's diminishing. But Istanbul remains a huge city, and it's an important pull on the Armenian community. That's the important pull, rather than say historic Armenian, areas that remain isolated and underdeveloped. So when Armenia finds that MO with Turkey, it will be one of two sort of combination sort of spectrum. Either it's going to swear loyalty to Turkey to basically become a Turkish client state or a state that will not challenge Turkey in any way, or it will be part of basically new Russian Empire, where Turkey has to accept the fact that Armenia is there and respect it because there is Russia behind Turkey. Otherwise, we can talk about the trade and all that, but that is secondary when it comes to both politics in Turkey, reality of Turkey, and the reality of Armenia, reality of Russia. The political preferences dictate these things, and in Georgia, going back to Georgia, of course, they have their own number of issues, and the fact that they had a conflict with Russia, direct open warfare with Russia, is a disaster, similar disaster for Georgia as it was for Armenia to have a direct confrontation with Turkey. Sort of inevitable disaster, because it's two different weight categories. Georgia cannot fight Russia just like Armenia cannot fight Turkey. That's all.
I'm going to give the floor to the next member of the audience. Please announce yourself and go ahead.
Hi, Narana here. Question to Areg. Would it be fair to say that your vision for Armenia is of that of Nikol Pashinyan's?
To make sure I understand, is my vision of Armenia that of Nikol Pashinyan?
Correct. Opening borders, peaceful economic growth through complete open borders. And and correct me. Yeah, just let me finish, please. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're talking about our neighbors, and very casual way, Turkey, after 100 years, until today, Turkey is realizing the last stages of genocide, still renaming cities, regions to erase every trace of Armenian, or how do you imagine that being neighbors? And if you could explain.
Okay, so let me answer the first question because it's the easier one. I have no idea what is Nikol Pashinyan's vision. I think Nikol Pashinyan right now is a random number generator. I don't know if he knows. He's definitely not what he's communicating is not a vision. It's just total randomness, and he changes his views on things all the time. Even if you look at his past 2 years, in the beginning he had fairly what looks like a constructive relationship with Ilham Aliyev, and then it was all total confrontation. It's really not clear. I think we need to look at these problems as completely past Nicols and past Serges and Robs and Levons. Okay, this is like we as a society need to understand what is in our best interest and what is it that will result in a disaster and complete loss of whatever is left of Armenia. Your second question is about how can we how can we be neighbors with Turkey that has committed the genocide and is denying it to this day? Answer is, we are the neighbors, okay? How can we be? We already are neighbors, okay? We cannot escape that, okay? We are stuck next to them, okay, whether we like it or not. I like card games a lot, because in card games, you find out that the one who wins in the long term is the one who is capable of choosing between bad and really bad. Okay, the long-term winner is the one who recognizes that he or she is in a bad situation, but realizes that the alternative is a total unmitigated disaster. And that person has the maturity to pick the bad and lose the short-term kind of game. But then if you keep doing this in the long term, eventually you come out as a winner. Same thing here. Look, we have a really bad situation and possibly outright loss of our homeland. Which one do you want to pick? Okay, the life is not fair, the world is not fair, okay, but we have to make decisions, and the results of our decisions is what will determine whether our children will be able to live in Armenia or not.
I will give the floor to George next, but I think I've been a little bit too aggressive with moving people back to the audience. So what I'm going to do next is the person who asked the question, I will keep them in the speaker section so they have a right to ask for a follow-up. So you get to ask, I guess, 2 questions, interrelated questions, or a follow-up to your original question, and then, or if you don't, and then we can move you back. So sorry about that. All right. George, go ahead.
Hi, guys. I have a question for Areg.
So look, I attract all the questions here.
Yeah, you do. So what would you say would be a worst-case scenario, or some worst-case scenarios, some best-case scenarios of the proposed action? What do you think will happen? Yeah, and then I have a second question as well.
Yeah. Look, I don't know. It's a bit difficult to speculate about the future, and it's not pleasant to voice extremely unpleasant kind of things, but you have to sort of look in the reality the way it is. Okay, and my real worry is, Emil sort of gives this very stark kind of description of where we are in right now, and we have gotten to that situation primarily due to our bad decision over the years. We could have probably avoided a lot of these things, so in the future, we could lose Syunik, we could lose Vardenis, we could lose all of Armenia. I don't know if if Turkey continues being as aggressive as it is, okay, then theoretically, and if Armenia really continues sort of in a confrontational way with Turkey the way it did, essentially the last couple of years, the result will be something like that. And when I say confrontational, I'm not putting the blame on Armenians per se, but what is it? We have a situation, and we have to understand. Look, you cannot build a country. You cannot build you cannot guarantee the survival of your state based on Tasib alone. Okay, we Armenians are very big on Tasib. Okay, and we are very much worried about being on Tasib at the end of the day. You cannot build a state, a survival state based on that. I'll give you a very specific example, just to tell you what we have to thank our existence on. Okay, in 1918, after the Sardarabad, Armenians were in terrible condition after Sardarabad, even though in our books we tell that we crushed the Turks. That's not entirely true. we had a tactical victory against the Turks. The Vehib Bey, who was a leader of the Turkish contingency, and Halil Kut, okay, who was another general leading the Turkish forces, came to Yerevan. Halil Kut was famous for having killed 300,000 Armenians. He was openly boasting about it. They put a list of conditions on the Armenians. Armenians shook their hand, satisfied all those 10 conditions. Everything Turks wanted, they gave to the Turks. Turks, in their turn, told them, okay, now that you are doing what we tell you, we will let you leave. Okay, and they didn't. They allowed Yerevan to survive. They allowed Ararat Valley to survive. Okay, and then they sort of went around the way. They went to Nakhijevan, to Yelizavetpol, which is Ganja now, and then went and occupied Baku. Right. So you could. This is 3 years after the Armenian genocide. Armenia was filled with victims of the Armenian genocide. This is probably the most untasib thing, okay, honorless thing Armenians could do, and yet it was that decision that allowed the Armenian state to survive, to later become the Armenian Soviet Socialist Republic, to later become the Third Republic. Okay? So if they had not done that, and they have said, oh, you guys have massacred 1 million people, we're going to keep fighting with you, there would be no Armenia right now. Okay? Now, hopefully we don't have to be in such horrible conditions in the future, but this simply gives you an example in the past where ultimately wise decisions, painful but wise decisions by Armenian leadership resulted in the survival of Armenia as it is right now.
Areg, very good point, Areg, but I have to intercede there for a second. Very good point about importance of taking pragmatic decisions, and that was a pragmatic decision to take in 1918. But had Turkey not lost the First World War just a few short months later, and had it not been for English and German and French involvement in the region as well, that's what prevented Armenian state collapse. The English occupation.
Yeah, I agree that too played a very big role. Woodrow's Treaty and everything.
That was and then of course the return of the Russians later.
Right. Agreed.
Okay, can I have a closing question here, since I may be the last person asking? Emil, how would Nikol Pashinyan's way of dealing with the issues we've been discussing be different from those of Robert Kocharyan? And is it a differentiating factor in these elections? I mean, after all, the elections are this weekend. So for people voting, how should they, what should they know about the way that these people will be acting on Agreement Point 9, basically?
Look, I think I mentioned earlier that it's like two different worlds colliding with Pashinyan and Kocharyan. I mean, you have somebody who has very little understanding of the world, and in Pashinyan has a very limited experience. Huge complexes, it turns out, and basic inability to manage resources that Armenia has, which are not great, but they're Armenia as of September 2020, Armenia was the strongest state it ever was in the past. Prior to that, it's in terms of capacity. Kocharyan, the reason Armenia, managed to go on for 25 years as it did was a large degree to Kocharyan's activism. First as chairman of the State Defense Committee of Artsakh, prevented the collapse and defeat in 1992. And this is what Areg was alluding to, that bad decisions were made to continue the confrontation, not to lose, not to lose early. Had Armenia lost early, obviously would gone through all of this earlier and maybe not worry about it today. But he managed to stop the defeat at the time. Then he managed to guide the Armenian economy through a form of recovery in the 2000s. And after all of that, he left the presidency and said goodbye without intention of coming back, and then got dragged back into it. So it's sort of a really a black and white choice for me. Maybe a bad metaphor for today, but really a stark choice. I mean, Armenia potentially has a future with Kocharyan. It doesn't have a future with Pashinyan. That's all there is to it.
Okay. Well, I think I'm going to close this evening. Thank you for everyone who has been with us listening to our conversation. And good night.
That concludes this week's conversation on Grung. We look forward to your feedback, including your suggestions for conversation topics in the future. Contact us on our website at groong.org, that's GROONG, or on our Facebook page, ANN-Groong, or in our Facebook group, Groong-Armenian News Network. Special thanks to Lara Osborne for providing the music for our podcast. I'm Hovik Manucharyan, and on behalf of everyone in this episode, I wish you a good week. Thank you for listening, and talk to you soon.